Dr. Hassan Abbas. How's everyone doing?
Good, good.
Assalamualaikum. Doing good, thank you.
Okay, so I guess now that we are ready, we will get started. So hello, Assam. Welcome back for our second mental health panel discussion. My name is Shumayl Hasan, and I'm once again going to be the moderator. Although I encourage the use of this discussion panel for educational purposes, this is not a substitute for medical and mental health care. The previous discussion touched upon topics such as shame, destigmatization, the most common mental health issues, social media, and the gap between those who are diagnosed with mental illness and those who can get the help that they need. In this segment, I wanted to particularly touch on how mental health affects second-generation youth. The number of second-generation immigrants continues to grow as the countries become more diverse. It's necessary to address these barriers that specifically affects this population as they grow up and not only enter adolescence, but navigate their place in adulthood as well. To help continue the conversation around issues such as blame, cultural norms, identity, and resilience, we have three guest speakers that have graciously agreed to join us today. So thank you, and I'm just going to do an introduction for each, and then we can get right into the questions. So one, we have Mona Suleman, Dr. Mona Suleman, a clinical psychologist practicing in Alexandria, Virginia. The focus of her practice is cognitive behavioral therapy with adolescents, adult couples, and families. We also have Dr. Hassan Abbas, who is a distinguished professor of international relations at the Near East South Asian Strategic Studies Center, National Defense University in Washington, DC. His forthcoming book is titled The Prophet's Heir. And finally, we have Brother Jalal, who is a lawyer and research focusing on intersections of law, religion, identity, and society. He serves as a director at the Mainstay Foundation, a nonprofit organization working in the space of research, education, leadership, and development for Muslim communities. So I'm just going to explain how this conversation is going to go in case we have some new people who weren't there in the last discussion. In the first portion of the discussion, I will ask each guest individual questions that are specific to their expertise. And in the second half, we will have a Q&A where people can ask questions that they want answered to the panel. If you have any questions that you want to ask anonymously, you can message me through the private function that is on Zoom. So let's begin. Dr. Mona, the first question is for you. My question is on immigrant guilt. That is the feeling that children of immigrants have where they feel like they have to fight through or ignore their struggles because of the risks and sacrifices their parents made to come here. Or they may feel like they're going through is not difficult or as what their parents went through, or that they have to succeed to prove to their parents that their move was worth it. So my question is how significant is immigrant guilt when it comes to mental health prevalence in second-generation immigrants in your experience?
I just want to confirm that was for me, the question?
Yes, that was for you.
Okay, good. So yes, that's a very important question and something that I deal with a lot because I work obviously with a lot of members of the community because they feel comfortable and familiar with, knowing that I'm from the same background. So as you mentioned, like first generation immigrants have their own sort of set host of problems, right? Like the things that they're struggling with, like assimilation, gaining financial stability, upward mobility, like understanding how new systems work. And then the second generation immigrants, so their children, have their own unique set of problems, in addition to just regular adolescent issues. They have to struggle with, things that like, like achieving their potential and feelings of low self-worth and how to feel like they can navigate both worlds, their parents' world and their own world. And, oftentimes the parents unintentionally kind of minimize the children's problems because they're not as tangible and they're not based on their survival needs as the parents' issues were. So it's hard for them to understand their children's problems. And as a result, the children end up, internalizing their problems and almost, as you said, have a sense of guilt about that. Like, why do I have these problems when my parents made so many sacrifices to come to this country? And like often that internalization leads to sort of the struggle within themselves. Like, is it okay for me to feel this way? And is it not okay to feel this way? And, we can look at research to show that this very pronounced guilt can lead to some very substantial problems in the lives of second generation immigrants. So if you look at like research of people that moved to the US at a young age, or the group of people of like children who were born in the US and compare those to the people that moved here later. So like their parents' generation, right? The ones that immigrated later in life, in adulthood or in adolescence, you find that the groups of children that people that moved here later in life as very young children, or people that were born here to adult immigrant parents or first generation parents, often have much more severe mental health issues than the parents themselves had. So that's actually been coined, the immigrant paradox. And the reason why it's paradoxical is because parents obviously come here to bring, to give their children a better life. And in a lot of ways they do, obviously, but that often comes at a cost, right? The cost of their, mental health needs. So we can look at research even on like suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts. And we find that people that were, that grew up here, came here at a very young age, often have higher suicide rates than people that came to the US specifically at an older age or as adults or adolescents. And we see that across a variety of different ethnic groups. So you see that in, Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans, as well as non-Latino white immigrants. So a lot of these trends, when you compare them to their own respective ethnic groups, you find that those rates of depression and things like anxiety and suicidal ideation tend to be higher in kids who have immigrated, whose parents immigrated here and who have grown up most of their life here. So the question then becomes like, why is it that these things are happening? And a lot of it has to do with what you talked about with their guilt that they struggle with, and also just the struggles with meeting parents' like expectations and the pressures that are put on them for having to navigate their own cultural beliefs as well as the dominant cultural beliefs. And oftentimes when we feel stuck, that can lead to, distress in different forms, whether it's anxiety or depression. So, then I think you also asked the question of what we can do about, this very significant problem. And in my opinion, I think one way to intervene that hasn't been done enough is to address the issue specifically with the first generation parents, because these children often have an opportunity through school and through media to learn a lot about mental health, right? So you all are learning about it in so many different ways, but I think the parents are not hearing about it as much. And often the parents are the gatekeepers through which their kids can access mental health resources. So I think that through, community leaders and in ways that fit within the paradigm of the first generation parents, if we can provide them with mental health education, maybe even having groups for parents where they can talk about their struggles and giving them, having a mental health professional kind of moderate those groups and providing them with skills on how to address their children's needs. And I think doing it in a group and open format would also remove some of the stigma that comes with these issues. And so, and connecting these parents to resources that they can then, trickle down to their children and help them access. So I think providing community education for parents who are the first generation, who are trying to raise these children in very stressful times, but not necessarily understanding the scope of the problem or knowing how to find resources. I think helping them would be key.
Thank you so much for that brilliant information. And I think it's extremely important to not just say that second generation children and youth have issues, but it's also their parents that do deserve to get help and to have that understanding and have that kind of communication with their children. I think communication is a really key point, as you mentioned, because without that, you can't have that moving forward in getting the help that you need.
Exactly.
So thank you so much. My next question is going to be for Brother Jalal. As we mentioned that when second generations Americans come in, when first generation Americans come in from different countries, there might be more reasons for second generations to have trouble seeking help for their mental health or even acknowledging it. So because they bring all their norms and because it's a way for them to keep ties to their home country and also a way for their children to have some kind of tie to their culture. It's a great way to create a home away from home, as I were to say, but there's also a cultural clash that can occur with being raised in a culture and environment that's so different from your parents. And it's really hard as an adolescent, and you can feel that you're constantly questioning your identity and your values. You have authored a book called Between Lake and Sea about a young man's struggle with identity, faith, and culture. And I wanted to ask, what do you need to do, like what do we need to do as a community to promote these challenging conversations around identity, faith, and belonging? And how can we help navigate the youth through these confusing years of adolescence and early adulthood?
Well, thank you, Shumayl, for that very important question. And thank you for having me on this panel. I think this conversation and conversations like these are an excellent first step in the direction of spreading awareness and making sure that communication is actually starting between the generations and between our families and our community at large. So one thing I would definitely focus on is embracing the multiplicity of identities. And that when we're coming from immigrant communities, many of us having the experience of our parents or our grandparents coming to the United States and building a better life for their children. So I'll give you the experience of my own grandparents when they came here to the United States. They came here in the late 70s and they were escaping the civil war that was taking place in Lebanon in their homeland. So my grandmother tells me of stories of how she ran between the streets, ducking from gunfire as she held her, young children with her, trying to get to the next car that would take them outside of the city. Then eventually, how they were able to get to the United States, how my grandfather had preceded them, had gone to kind of establish for them the basic amenities so that they can come and bring their family. But my grandmother being that hero from our own family and her definitely sharing from her own humbleness and humility, not giving us all the details at times and our parents kind of filling in here and there, definitely inspired us so that we realize and acknowledge how much our parents and our grandparents sacrificed in order for us to be here, right? One thing I would say for our generation, and I would love to extend this to my children, is making sure that we appreciate that experience and that we have these conversations and we learn about the experience of our parents and our grandparents, because our identity as Americans, as ones living in this country and are embracing the culture here and are integrated in the societies that we live in, we definitely need to acknowledge and see how much more value we bring to the fabric of the society with the rich experience that our parents and our grandparents come from. That adds value to us. That adds a lot for us and our own experience here. So that's something to keep in mind. Having these conversations with our elders is huge. And trust me, they'd love for you to sit down and ask them about their experience. So that's one. Another thing is for us to see that a lot of times we frame this conversation as one that is a clash of civilizations, or a clash of cultures, that my culture being, from the Middle East or from South Asia clashes with my American identity, when in fact it doesn't. Or even using our religious and faith-based identity as being Muslims, and that clashes with American culture and my identity as an American. I'll tell you from my humble experience as an attorney, as a community leader, as someone who's been involved in, just like many of you, not necessarily in a monolithic setting where there's people from different faiths, my colleagues, the people that I work with, coming from many different backgrounds, be it religiously, culturally, ethnically. It is when we embrace our identities, all of them together, and are able to essentially work and conduct ourselves and live naturally as we are, and not necessarily taking one face or the other or switching those identities where we are. That's when we feel more comfortable in our own skin. That's when we're truer to ourselves and we're truer to the people around us. Now, sometimes we may shy away from things because we may feel like people won't accept us and what we have to bring or what we have to offer. But when we are comfortable in our own skin and we realize that we actually, our self-worth is not contingent upon the way other people look at us, but rather that confidence that we bring, and realizing that it's fine for me to have that hyphenated identity. It's fine being Muslim, American, South Asian, Middle Eastern, etc., etc. In fact, I've had so many conversations where from people from different communities where they'll say, "Man, you're so interesting," and not for me, but for people around me. Like, you're so interesting. That's so rich. That's so dynamic. I don't have that experience. My experience is, a lot less spicy, right? Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of spice from our background, so we can add that as well. And in addition to all of that, I would say that, especially for our younger audience, and I belong to that audience. I belong to that generation. I've gone through these experiences. I've, alhamdulillah, with my experience in my own family, I was born and raised in the States, but we lived a part of our childhood also in Lebanon. So we had somewhat of a challenge as being Americans living in our homeland, right? But the challenge was overcome through us realizing it's not one thing over the other. Our uniqueness comes in having all of these experiences and better contributing to the society that we're living in with these advantages. So in the Lebanese framework, for example, we were able to contribute with the knowledge and experience that we had coming from the States. In the American framework, we're able to contribute to the fabric of society and integrate ourselves more effectively by saying, hey, we have rich experiences that we're coming from abroad. So approaching things with this more holistic, comprehensive, globalized framework is going to be extremely advantageous for you. I remember, as an example, my first year in law school, when I was attending the Intellectual Property Student Society or Student Association, they told me, I asked one of the advisors there, and I was like, I'm interested in learning more. And, lo and behold, in my practice, one of the areas I focus on is trademarks as part of intellectual property and servicing a lot of companies and organizations. At that time, I had no idea, but it was an area of interest. I asked him, what do you advise? What do you think from your experience? And one of the things he said, I don't mean to be too kind of forward, but you're Middle Eastern, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, do you speak another language? I'm like, yeah, I speak Arabic fluently. He's like, honestly, a lot of firms are looking for people that know multiple languages. So that's probably one of your biggest advantage, just right off the bat without even addressing anything else. So that I could have been, like taking a step back and, being offended that he, looked at me and saying, oh, you're brown or you're Middle Eastern, etc. Another language, but rather embracing it and approaching it with confidence, approaching it, this is an added value that I have that the person next to me doesn't have. I will also show that I'll be able to, work and compete in a way where I'm adding much more value than those surface things that one may identify. But that takes you being able to be fluid and engage with the setting that you're in, and being confident in what you have to offer. Inshallah, maybe in the discussion, we can include more examples and talk further about it. But those are just a few notes to keep in mind as we're looking at that conversation.
Thank you so much. Your experiences actually really resonate with me as someone who's Pakistani. I grew up in Canada and then moved to the United States. And even though Canada and the United States share a border, it's all very different. In university, I'd always get teased like, oh, you're American, but you're Pakistani, where are you from? So that really resonated with me and made me feel like maybe I need to reevaluate my own identity and try to be a little bit happier with who I am. Thank you so much. And the next question is for Dr. Hassan Abbas. We just discussed university, I just brought it up, for mental health, problems can affect many areas of student lives, reducing their quality of life, academic achievement, satisfaction with college experience, and can negatively impact relationships with friends and family members. Mental health conditions can feel debilitating, scary, make some learners retreat inwards rather than seeking help. These issues can have a long-term consequence for students, affecting their future employment, earning potential, and overall health. As an educator, having taught in various universities on the East Coast to a variety of student groups, What steps can educators and educational institutes take to create an environment that best supports student mental health, especially during a pandemic where it's hard to get that one-on-one, face-to-face communication and conversation started?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, Shumayl, I think I must say we really appreciate this opportunity, and I really give you credit for taking this initiative. You and the other hosts and your parents, one feels in the community here, we should have had such interactions long ago, because they add a flavor of life that we live every day. And at times that is missing so often. So this is really appreciated, this whole effort and initiative. I speak as a teacher and as a in a sense in a writer, and both the first two speakers, Dr. Suleman and Jalal, have done such a fantastic job, and I really mean it, by inspiring us, by setting the stage for a wonderful conversation later on, and I look forward to that. I thought of a few points reference to what you have asked, but the two speakers and Jalal has triggered my mind to a couple of stories. And I think as a teacher, what I do also is to link my teaching points of whatever I have to offer. And it's always, by the way, a two-way street. It's a teacher is never supposed to be believing and arguing that he or she has all the wisdom, and on the other side are just recipients. In most cases, this only learning and wisdom happens when there's a communication. So I'm thinking of these two stories very quickly, and I'll mention those, and we can go to some of the other responses a bit later on. I'm reminded immediately of one of my very dear friends who I lost, frankly, who committed suicide. And that had such a huge impact on my life. This was in Pakistan. This was, I think, 1987. He was my best friend. We were together in Islamabad and Rawalpindi studying. He was from, I'm mentioning his background only just to give the context and relate it to what you've asked. He was from a very privileged family. His father was a general in the army. He had everything from all the facilities, luxury of life. And he was a wonderful person. I still feel the warmth he had for me as a friend. So everything was happening in a perfect state. Then came the point which those of us from South Asian Middle East also come, the decision making about career and the pressure that starts building on you. And your parents start asking you, in case of South Asians, are you becoming a doctor? Are you becoming an engineer? You couldn't get into a professional school? Oh God, what will you do? So those kind of questions started happening, and he was forced to go to an engineering university. Both of us moved to Lahore, one of the finest cities, and he went to an engineering school. But he was torn. He was a very open-minded person who was more of a, I would say, a poet, and would love to roam around. He had a huge that bike that he would travel. And his parents said, no, you are going to be an engineer, with mathematics, physics. It kind of confined his whole mental thought. He started saying things to us, that his father was very well-known person. His mother was also very active in leading an organization. They were very successful people. But he realized that all they wanted him was, wrongly realized, I think at that time, they just want to push him into a career because that was the good thing in the society. Or everyone thought the public pressure, oh, this is the only way to succeed in life, if you have that title with you. And it took 6 months. He started saying things like, I want to take revenge. I will tell them what it means, and then they will know what my feelings are. And one fine morning, he was no more. He shot himself in the head. I'm sorry to put it like that, but as an 18-year-old, that had a huge impact. And then later on in life, I still am in touch with his parents. How many years? 35 years later. And what we realized that was nobody was listening to him, and this pressure on him. And that's pressure students go through, that you have to be somebody like this. And only if you fit into that model, you're successful. I'll keep the other story. I'm sorry for this kind of a sad story in a sense, but I think this is so useful. And that had an impact on me. And I'll just jump to my second story, which happened to me in a sense. This was again, I think, about 6-7 years ago. Moved to US, became a professor, and I got a book contract at that time on Taliban. My background is in police. I was a police officer in Pakistan for a very short time, came to US, did my PhD from Fletcher School in Harvard, and then moved to DC after having taught at Columbia. So everything from the professional point of view was happening right for me. I had outstanding opportunities in this country, I must add. And then I got this dream come true contract from one of the best publishers, Yale University Press, to write a book on the Taliban. And this was 2011, when the rise of militancy was happening. And what happened was that for 2 years, I couldn't write. I tried almost every day, everything again, as I said, I was publishing op-eds in the topmost places. It was a perfect career, perfect, I should not say, it was good, smooth development as a professional. And then I called my professor, and I'll name her, Jessica Stern. She's a professor at Harvard, now at Boston, one of my mentors and guides. And I called her and I said, Professor Jessica, I want to know more about writer's block. I just can't write. And she said, Hassan, I know exactly what's happening to you. And she said, this is a fear of failure, because you think that you have done well. You were a law enforcement, you were a police chief in Pakistan. This was very relevant for US, the Taliban, what was happening in Pakistan. She said, you have been to Harvard, you have done everything right. You were a professor at Ivy League. Now that you have got a contract, you're worried that what if my book will not do well? And what if everyone who thinks of me on CNN, et cetera, that I am Taliban expert and my book fails? And I realized, oh yes, that is the fear. I'm so scared that what will happen despite having done everything right. And honestly, believe me, I think 2 days, she said, nobody, what will it fail? You already have achieved. You have a book contract. It will go fine. That one conversation with my teacher, and she's my role model. And that's, I want to be a teacher like that, who asks, who really tries to be in my shoes. And that had huge impact. I know I've taken a bit longer, but I'll close with or maybe I should stop. As a teacher, I have so many stories, I can go on and on. But I thought these 2 stories might be of some relevance to our audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I know how hard it must be to firstly, not just talk about a topic, but to bring in your own experiences and some very difficult topics to discuss, especially when you don't want to put blame on anything. You have all these situations that come together. Thank you so much for giving us those stories. We enjoyed them, I'm sure, and we definitely have things to learn from them. The next question will be for Dr. Mona again. In this question, I wanted to discuss the concept of blame. As we discussed with Dr. Hassan Abbas in regards to his story with a suicide, there's a lot of blame that goes around with that. You want to blame the parents, you want to blame the child. Why couldn't they come? It can be tiring to routinely question the severities of illnesses and the sincerity of your efforts. Especially in his story, his friend was probably thinking he's working really, really hard towards something. Maybe he's feeling like he's being blamed for not putting in the amount of effort, not working hard enough, not getting the grades, not wanting to do certain things. This concept of blame can keep many youth from accessing the care that they need. However, even if it's flipped, where the professional, for example, says, hey, let me give you this pill. It's not your fault. You take this pill, you go to this session, you'll feel much better, which may make someone feel better at the time, but it also takes away their agency, their control of their own life, and can make them feel like their determination, their hard work that they put into, pushing through, pushing forward isn't enough. So as a clinical psychologist whose focus is in cognitive behavioral therapy, my question is how can we take responsibility for our own mental health without allowing ourselves or others to blame us for seemingly perpetuating those very illnesses?
Thank you. I love talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, so I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. And also this concept of blame, which is, such a big issue for, within our community and many different communities. I think the first thing to sort of keep in mind is that we need to start seeing, mental illness or, mental health struggles similar to that as we do with physical or medical issues, right? Like there's a genetic predisposition, and then there's often some sort of life major transition or stressors that makes us more susceptible to developing certain symptoms or mental health issues. So it isn't, the focus really needs to be on prevention and finding solutions, and not on trying to identify blame, because I don't think that that's very helpful. And one of the reasons why I really enjoy doing cognitive behavioral therapy is because the patient becomes an active participant in the process of change, right? So through CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, we sort of help the patient sort of identify certain ways of thinking that then they employ in their life and use moving forward. So there isn't this dependency on the therapist, right? And so if you think about our feelings don't just come out of anywhere. According to a CBT perspective, there is some underlying thought that's connected to those feelings, right? So the process would be that you have a certain thought, and that we don't always know or aren't always aware of what that thought is, and that thought leads to feelings, and those feelings lead to behaviors. And so I really appreciated hearing Dr. Abbas's story about his writer's block and then the fear of failure, because he was kind of doing CBT at that time, is identifying what the underlying thought was that triggered his fear, and that led to the behavior of the writing block. So in doing CBT, the goal is then to sort of understand what is it that thought might be that might be triggering your feelings, and so we can look at certain examples that might happen in very benign, easy situations. So for example, if someone finds themselves feeling sort of down or not feeling really good about themselves, right, and they're not sure why that might be happening in their current life, and maybe they realize that there's, you're looking around and looking for certain situations that might have happened in your life. And maybe you realize that you had texted a friend, a few days ago, and that friend hasn't responded yet. And so then, if you were to talk about that, or, with your therapist or on your own, you would understand that, well, what does that feeling might be connected to this certain trigger that happened? And what does that trigger elicit in me? What thoughts does that elicit in me? Maybe it might be a thought of, I'm boring, I'm not interesting enough to people, my friends don't really care about me, and people don't care about me. Or maybe that leads to feelings of, lack of importance, or feelings of fear of, not being valued enough by our friends. So it would be that certain thought, that underlying thought, that's important to understand in order to know why it could lead to certain feelings of sadness, feelings of, and then maybe the resulting behavior of that would be a desire to withdraw, right? So not necessarily wanting to, maybe we wouldn't call back our other friends, or we're not texting other people, or we're not being very social. And then, as you can see, that kind of perpetuates the cycle all over again and makes it into a bigger problem. So if you kind of follow the pattern down the line, is you have this one incident that leads to a certain underlying thought, that leads to certain feelings, that leads to the behavior of withdrawing from people. And then often that cycle sort of repeats itself. And so it's really important to get to the core and be able to identify what the thought is that's contributing to our state of mind. And I think once you kind of learn all of the different sort of ways that our minds can play tricks on us to make us believe these thoughts, it's important to challenge them, right? And to say to ourselves, well, is it really true that I'm a boring person, or that I'm not fun, or that I'm not, that my friends don't like me? Why don't we look at that possibility? What is the evidence that you have that supports that? And do you have evidence that doesn't support that? Have you been in contact with other friends lately? Do people, show up for, call you on your birthday? Let's look at ways that we can challenge those beliefs. And then that becomes sort of your modus operandi moving forward, is whenever you have a negative belief, often is what causes these kinds of feelings. It's important to sort of challenge that negative belief and talk back to our thoughts. And that makes us feel like we have a sense of agency and being able to do that ourselves. And all it really requires is just some awareness in the beginning and kind of setting you up for being able to do this by yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mona. As someone who very frequently has thoughts like that, especially when you're confined in at home during a pandemic, and I'm sure other people will be going through their own issues. So if someone doesn't reply right away, the first response is to be like, hey, maybe they don't like me. Is it because I'm not putting in the effort? What am I doing wrong? It's completely my fault. And because you're isolated or you have very few people in the home, it starts to kind of fester and boil, and you start to feel like, maybe I'm just not good enough, or people just don't like me. So thank you for bringing that up, because I feel like anyone listening, myself included, can start to maybe hit from the roots and go towards the thought before we hit into the feeling. So thank you so much.
Sure.
So as mentioned, now it's Brother Jalal, your question. As mentioned just now with Dr. Mona, there's their feelings of worthlessness can come in, especially now when you're in a pandemic and you're by yourself, and you don't have a lot of connection. You can start to sink into a hole. Feel the feeling of worthlessness, hopelessness, and insignificance can kind of come up, and these feelings are often symptoms of depression, but can also arise due to things such as low self-esteem, neglect, abuse, trauma, or other difficult situations that pose a threat to a person's self, as we discussed. Feeling worthless can make it difficult to feel motivated to pursue your goals when you feel nothing you do is right, or none of your efforts will make a difference. A question was posed by Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib salam to his followers. Do you suppose you are insignificant while within you lies the greater universe? So I wanted to ask, what are your views on the meaning behind the quote, and how can we apply the lesson to our everyday lives?
So thank you for that question, Shumayl. With regards to this, of course, the words of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, I'm no one to interpret them, but just as a humble student of trying to build an understanding so that I personally can benefit from this. And it goes without saying, just as a disclaimer, when it comes to the first part of your question, definitely if someone is experiencing some of these symptoms, then they should go to an expert like Dr. Mona, who it's a pleasure to hear from, and hearing from her expertise, and making sure that we don't take lightly when it comes to these mental health issues, and just saying maybe someone is just sad or not having a good day. Definitely these things need to be taken very seriously, and consulting with experts is something that should be of the highest priority. So with that said, taking this question from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, where he says in the original Arabic, وَتَحْسَبُ أَنَّكَ جُرْمٌ صَغِيرٌ وَفِيكَ انطوى العالم الأكبر, has personally for me been one of the saviors for me, and something that I've shared with many people, believe it or not, in a personal setting, a community setting, and even a professional setting. I'll give you a story where one of the young interns that we had working in our law firm he was just going through, I wouldn't say a rough patch, just it was just bad for him. He was not performing, he was not doing well. He was someone who came in with a lot of potential. And we looked at this individual as one who, man, you were excited about him being part of our organization. All-star resume, great background, went to a great school, very intelligent young man. But his performance was completely off. So I took him aside one day and I told him, what's going on? And he's like, oh, everything's great. I'm like, no, it's not. What's going on? And he said, I'm fine. I'm great. I'm just, everything's okay. So I told him that question. I asked him that question. And he spoke Arabic. And that struck his heart because of how connected he felt. He's never heard it before. I asked him, وتحسب أنك جرم صغير, or أتحسب أنك جرم صغير وفيك انطوى العالم الأكبر? Do you suppose you're an insignificant entity while within you lies the greater universe? And he just stopped and began crying. We had a nice conversation about self-worth, motivation, and how he sees himself. On the face of things, everything looks great, but he was dealing with a lot of issues. Of course, in his situation, it wasn't one of depression or having underlying mental health issues. It was more so he needed a mentor. He needed good friends around him. And of course, these can contribute, and I'm sure Dr. Mona can give us insight on that, how these can help people that are going through some troubles and going through certain situations. But he needed to change some of the aspects that he was living through and some of the situations that he was in so that he could be more consistent and make sure that his thoughts, his feelings, and his actions were all following suit with one another. Right? So taking this into our own lives and having these conversations is extremely important, in that we may face certain challenges, we may face certain problems, but realize you are not your challenge, you are not your problem. We may face certain failures, realize you are not your failure. You're learning from your failures, and your failures are significant for you to succeed. A lot of the things that we need are already within us. A lot of the tools that we're looking for already exist and are within our grasp. We just need to pay attention to them. We need to steer ourselves back into that direction of realizing how much value we bring as our own selves. This path that we have in each of our own individual journeys and becoming the best that we can possibly be, and taking ourselves on that path, whether it be spiritually, intellectually, what have you. One of the most beautiful sayings that go back to also Imam Ali, who he recites or cites from the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon them both, is a paradigm in which we look at how does one get to know one's Lord? How does one get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And it's a very brief saying, but it shows us so much into how significant we are as individuals, as ourselves. Man arafa nafsa, arafa rabbah. Whoever knows himself knows his Lord. If you and I want to be ones who delve into the secrets of divine love and have that journey towards the divine, we need to make sure that we have a relationship with ourselves, and that we see our self-worth, we see our value, we see our own significance. Not one, of course, and it goes without saying, that steers us in the direction of arrogance or pride, but rather one that realizes we are connected to something that is greater. In fact, it is greatest. This saying of Ali ibn Abi Talib, do you suppose you're insignificant while within you lies the greater universe, is the key to each and every one of us being able to take that step back and see, man, I shouldn't feel down. I shouldn't feel less. I shouldn't feel that I'm, not worthy. All of the challenging things, whether it's you and you, the conversation you're having with yourself, or you and others, the way you compare to other people, and you and your ambitions, whatever it may be, it's an excellent reminder that I humbly would say, from my own experience and sharing with other people, and I could get a number of different stories of young men and women that I've interacted with in professional settings and community settings, where the principle in this resonated so well and was life-changing. So hopefully we can implement that. And it's definitely, I would say, and I'll end with this, it's a lot easier said than done. But we know through the basics of education, when we're rearing our children, when we're teaching in classrooms, when we're working in offices, repetition is key. And we remind ourselves, because as human beings, we forget. As human beings, we may be heedless to some things. It's okay. Let us remind each other, renew that inspiration, renew that motivation, and continue being a positive force in each other's lives. Because you never know, that one thing that you say, that one reminder that you may bring, may be that necessary push in the right direction for the person that you're talking to. And that person may be you.
Thank you so much for the anecdote as well as the lesson. I think that's extremely important to realize that, you know, you can make a difference, if not just in your own life, but the little things that you do can make a difference in someone else's life, as long as you just have the light to reach out and make that impact. So thank you so much. And our final question is for Dr. Hassan Abbas. So day-to-day problems affect important aspects of your life, like relationships and work, as mentioned by Brother Jalal, and can have a big impact on your mental health as well. When things don't go the way that they want to, or if they get better emotions, they can cause overwhelming feelings within you. Sometimes it can do good to hear examples about overcoming these problems to give someone the motivation to reach out and get the help that they need. Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib's teachings about wisdom, justice, and selflessness continue to be cherished by people around the world. Professor Hassan, as you have recently published the book, The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, I wanted to ask, what examples of hardship and resilience can be found from the life of Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu salam, and can you translate any of those lessons and those words to the youth today, where they can draw strength to overcome those troubled times? Dr. Hassan, I think you are muted.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We do this every day, and despite that. So thank you so much. And I had stepped on the side actually just to pick one of Jalal's books, which I want to highly recommend. But as soon as I realized he is ending his comment, I came back. I'm sure it is one of the books behind him. Jalal, if you can show the book with the blue title, which was mentioned by Fatima as well, because this was one of the finest works and so relevant to the audience here. Yes, this one. So I highly recommend all of you to see this. Maybe later on, Shumayl can send the link to everyone as well. I would second what Jalal said. If it crosses a certain line when it becomes a medical or a clinical issue. I mean, Dr. Suleman, Mona Suleman and her colleagues and that professional expertise is so relevant. There is everything else we are saying cannot compensate for the kind of scientific side of things and the medical side of things. So I second Jalal. One thing I'll close, and my eyes are on the watch. I connecting it with my previous thought as well, when I had mentioned on my previous book the issue of fear. The response to that, and this I link this with Ali alayhi salam, is fearlessness. And I am particularly, as his biographer, as his very, very humble biographer, I started the work with this. And by the way, I got my advanced copy just yesterday, so hopefully it'll be in market soon. And I start and end with this quote, his final quote, when he was hit by Ibn Muljam saying, "Fuztu bi Rabbi Kaaba," by God, I have triumphed. And my question is, triumphed against whom? Triumph about what? Of course, there's a range of issues. His enemies were still there, so he couldn't particularly say from his point of view, I'm putting my own words while being extremely respectful and careful. I think that battle that he had won, for which he said, I have triumphed, was the struggle within. The struggle within in itself to be able to carry on with the legacy of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And that continuation of legacy had to be personal through his grief, through his struggles. And what I had learned while writing the book, and which is relevant here, is that it was often, I realized that I love Ali, but I also learned that I don't know Ali. Because in many cases, in our gatherings, which are extremely important, the religious ones, as well as other social interactions, we go to these big stories again and again, and at times we don't always jump deeper into those. By which it means is that we love him, but we, in many a times, never go deeper into those meanings and fail to look at him as a human being. For instance, and I say it carefully, if we would argue that he loved battle, he loved it, but it was, I think, the least of his favorite places. His favorite place was the prayer rug and talking to people, and dealing with their personal day-to-day problems, not in the battlefield. And if we would argue that he, like we today say, Ya Ali Madad, or aspiring to connect with his legacy, spiritual legacy, and seek help from him, that's all fine in the spiritual sense. But if we are not going step by step, learning from each bit the lessons of his life, we will miss that point. His fearlessness, his trust in God. And I will close with this one thought, which actually I was alerted when you had mentioned one of Ali's quote and Jalal, and I'll quote from my book, which I had a limited space to, when I was talking about his legacy, and I could pick was like 10 or 12 major quotes. And the one which is so relevant is, I'll just read out. This is from one of his major works, when he said, "Your cure is within you, but you do not know. Your illness is from you, but you do not see. You are the clarifying book, through whose letter becomes manifest the hidden. You suppose that you are a small body, but the greatest world unfolds within you. You would not need what is outside yourself if you would reflect upon self, but you do not reflect." And I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan Abbas. That really touched me, and I'm sure anyone who's listening as well. So thank you all for all the guest speakers. We do have a Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, I did get some sent anonymously to me, but if anyone wants to send any more, we do have just under 10 minutes. So the first question I had, and this is any of the three guest speakers can answer. What are the different mental health issues you normally see in second-generation immigrants, and how do they differ from those of first-generation immigrants? If anyone wants to take the floor.
I'm happy to attempt that one. So the oftentimes I see personally in my practice with second-generation immigrants is they're often struggle with more anxiety than the first-generation immigrants, and I think it's because, you know, one of the reasons might be that with first-generation immigrants, they've already kind of had so many hardships and you know, like have seen sort of some of the harshest situations, especially if they're coming from certain countries in which there's a lot of crises and things that they're trying to, you know, move a step away from. And so, you know, the other type of struggles that they encounter, you know, the things they've already gone through have already sort of prepared them for these other struggles that they encounter moving forward. Whereas for the second generation, you know, oftentimes those particular life situations often create anxiety because they haven't really encountered any type of major survival type crisis the way that their parents might have. So I definitely see, and then there's, you know, when you add on the, you know, the pressure for academic achievement and, you know, as we talked, the other speakers talked about, you know, becoming an engineer and doctor and so forth. Often those types of struggles and the feelings of not being able to achieve what they aim to achieve or what they're expected to achieve often creates anxiety.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mona. Another question that we just received is, what are the best ways to cope with loss and grief? Anyone wants to take the floor?
Just to mention one sentence, I give all my time to Jalal and Dr.
So if any of you would like to, maybe any ways that you personally might cope with loss or grief or that heavy feeling in your heart.
I'll just add a quick comment, and Dr. Mona, if you can give us some insight from a professional perspective as well. When it comes to loss, we have this in our, both from a faith-based perspective and then culturally, where many of us emphasize the idea that whatever loss that we have is incomparable to those that came before us, especially from a spiritual standpoint, looking at the loss or the grief of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon them both. And there's often an emphasis when it comes to funerals and the memorials for our loved ones, connecting back to this this memory that is truly immortal. And there's a reason behind that. This idea that those who have sacrificed in the tragedies that have come before us, our tragedies and our grief and our loss is easier to handle when we realize that we come from a legacy, from a lineage, from an experience that was so profound, right? And it's that attachment to that living legacy, if you will, that makes us feel like it's going to be better and that there's a reason for all of this. And the emphasis from a Quranic perspective, for example, the verse that many of us may hear when it comes to the death of a loved one is Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, which is a verse from the Holy Quran that we are from God and to Him we return. So loss and grief from one perspective is, if you're looking at it through the right paradigm, is actually, this is a natural part of our lives. This is a natural part of our growth, and that death is a reality and one that we accept because our loved ones are not just for us. We had the privilege and the ability as a gift from God to experience this individual in our lives. But in reality, they belong to God. We all belong to God. So we may at one point be experiencing this loss and grief, but we need to keep that perspective in mind to realize this is what's meant to be. And when we have that in our mindset, of course, grief is natural. We should grieve. We should experience that. There's nothing wrong with grief. In fact, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, grieved for the loss of his wife, his beloved Khadija, peace and blessings be upon her, grieved for the loss of his uncle who was his supporter and his backbone for an entire year, actually. And it was called the year of grief, the year that he lost both Khadija and Abu Talib. So from the sunnah of the Prophet, the tradition of the Prophet, we realize he being the focal point of our faith as Muslims, grief is very natural, very real, and should be one that we don't shy away from, but at the same time keeping the perspective of we are from God and to Him we return.
I just wanted to add on, Jalal, I really appreciate
Dr. Mona, I think. Oh. I think that there has been some technical difficulties on Dr. Mona's side. If she joins in a moment, we could let her continue. It has come to 12 o'clock, more or less. I wanted to ask if there's any comments that you would like to kind of end us off with. And I wanted to thank you all for being part of this conversation and giving us your time and experiences. Thank you so much. And I'll leave the floor to you if you want to have any comments just to end the topic.
I will just quickly thank you very much again on behalf of everyone and giving us this opportunity, and with a request to continue these conversations. We really learn to listen to each other, and that's the only way from learning from each other that will help us through these challenges in our community. We are all in this together. Thank you.
Also, if there's any information on both your books, if you guys want to just mention, I have linked it in the chat if anyone wants to click on it and just get the Amazon links as well. If you want to read the books, as the conversation was very interesting, definitely does hit close to home personally for me, and I'm sure for the listeners as well. If there's anything you would like to say.
Thank you so much. I mean, I received some text messages from some of our friends on this call about the quote that I mentioned, where I took it. This is Hazrat Ali's quote, which was translated by William Chittick in one of his books on Sufism. I've taken a picture of that, and I will try to send this to you, Fatima, and you can then share it with others, especially this quote. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to end the talk with just a small comment that there will be ups and downs. There will be times when we will struggle. We're all human beings, but when you reach those struggles, just know that you're not alone. Our struggles can be our strength. We can embrace them instead of trying to hide them, because that's your true self, and who you truly are is exactly who you need to be. This is, I think, the first step in replacing the I in illness as a we for wellness. I just want to thank everyone for being part of the conversation, all the people who are here to listen in, and I hope you all have a good night and good day. Thank you all. Jazakallah.